Good day, and welcome to our Analysis Weekly Wraps. I am Viv Govender, and this week we're going to cover the Trump's apparent victory in Iran, the latest developments in the GNU, as well as a report from Nedbank about the state of the South African economy. In the AI sector, we're going to look at the following. Firstly, results from Micron, which, for those that don't know, is part of our AI portfolio, as well as victories for Anthropic and Meta with regards to some copyright lawsuits that have been placed against them. So let's just start off with Trump's victory. Now, if you had to ask me 2 weeks ago what would have happened had Trump bombed Iran, and what would be the best possible outcome that could have happened from this, and this is pretty much what it would have been, which is basically Iran just takes it, has only a slight response, which was telegraphed well in advance. They bombed an airfield. Airfield basically is mostly tarmac. They warned the Qatari government ahead of time that this was going to happen. Therefore, there were no servicemen, etc., injured, and basically called it a day. And then they accepted, along with Israel, a ceasefire. Though there's been some accusations of violations of both sides, it seems to be holding at the moment. Fingers crossed that it does, for much longer. But that ceasefire seems to be holding. So effectively, it was like a 12-day war brought to an end, with Iran losing some serious or senior personnel, including scientists as well as military leaders, and likely having some facilities damaged by the bombing, which could possibly set back their nuclear desires by a bit. Now, the one thing to understand here is that it's quite likely the Iranians were aware of the attack coming, because the post-attack, we can look at the amount of radiation released from the site that was bombed. And it doesn't seem to be the kind of radiation signal you'd get if, for instance, the nuclear stockpile was actually damaged or breached or something. It's not that radiation signature. So it's quite likely that either it was not damaged, or more likely it was moved ahead of the strike, which means that the Iranians have a significant amount of enriched uranium, which they could possibly, with maybe more enrichment, use to make a bomb. So that still remains as a problem. But in terms of what the market is fearing, things like the Straits of Hormuz, which is that piece of water south of Iran being blocked, and which have cut off more than 20% of the world's oil and natural gas going through, that has not happened. We haven't seen significant damage in Israel itself. I think about 27 or 30 people were killed, but we weren't talking about major, in terms of like substantial damage in Israel that would, mean that the Iranians would draw any kind of confidence that, they would be able to successfully deter another attack. And Trump, basically is able to come away from this, in his own kind of particular way, claiming victory. And I think in this particular case, it's fair. He, like I said, has got what's possibly the best outcome he could have gotten in this particular set of circumstances. Ceasefire, damage to Iranian facilities, and Israel with some damage, but not enough to basically make them want to go on a vengeful attack against Iran. Now, moving on to our local politics, which is the GNU. We have seen the firing of a deputy minister of trade, Whitfield, I think his name is Andrew Whitfield, and this comes, I think, as a bit of a surprise to the DA, because they called an emergency meeting because of it. Now, the GNU has been quite ineffectual, and we'll talk about it in a second with regards to Nedbank in the report about South Africa, in terms of doing much positive for the South African economy. But it has been a serious source of friction in the South African political space. The people out of the GNU, the MK party and the UFF have kind of chastised the ANC because of the fact that they're partnering with the DA. The DA has not gotten really much in terms of positive effects from the GNU. Their policies have not been followed. So other than like political support, they're not getting really kind of much from that, and like a few political posts rather. They're not getting much more than that. And the ANC has also, like I said, they've been chastised by the MK and EFF as being sellouts because they're partnering with the DA.
They also are facing significant, political headwinds. Recently, we saw the DA try and give basically a vote of no confidence against the mayor and the speaker in Joburg. The speaker, I think, is ousted. The mayor was not. So the partners in the GNU are not really on the best of terms at the moment. So in terms of what the situation of the GNU is, it's not great for anyone involved in it, but it is good for South Africa. At least that's the way the round reflects things, that's the way the markets reflect things. The problem is, I think that going forward, the political differences, the political incentives are going to win through, and well before the next election, we will see the GNU split up. Just because politically it does not make sense for the DA to be partnered with the ANC going to an election where the ANC is likely to be in trouble. It doesn't make sense for the ANC to be partnered with the DA when it gives them an area of attack from the other flank with regards to the MK and the EFF. They're not going to win the DA's voters. They're going to lose voters to the MK and EFF. So it kind of makes sense from that point of view that they are going to, both parties there, and there are obviously other parties involved in the GNU, but the two main parties, the the ANC and the DA, are likely to want to end this thing before the next election, enough time ahead of the next election, so that they can, campaign on different, messages other than the GNU. And then moving on to a report by Nedbank about the state of the South African economy. Now, this was released a couple of days ago. And the day after it was released, we saw Nedbank Group fall substantially. And what the report basically does, other than the situation with the bank itself, was it talked about the state of the South African economy. The company, the bank, basically is reducing its forecasted growth rate for South Africa from 1.4% down to 1%. Now, even 1.4% is below our population, requirements here. We need to be growing in excess of 5, maybe even 6%, to make a substantial dent in the unemployment rate of South Africa, to make a substantial enough difference in the state of the economy that it is seen in some kind of reasonable time frame by the people of the country. The fact that we are growing not even 1.5%, but 1%, well, that's below where we need to be to just maintain what the current economy looks like because of population growth, etc. Now, like I mentioned to you, this comes about after we saw disappointing numbers from the GNU, for the last year or so, and it does appear that whatever hope you might have had about the DA's ability to manage things, or the ANC's being chastised and therefore willing to go and be more efficient, etc., about how they run the economy, hasn't really reflected in the actual economy. We have seen a lot of a sharp rise, in fact, over the last year or so for SA Inc. stocks. Our banks, our retail, etc., did really well after the GNU was announced. That really hasn't translated in terms of the actual economy, and so at some point in time, either the economy has to catch up, or maybe some of these gains have to be looked at again. But especially if you look at what is the economy is going to look like going forward, where if we do have the GNU break up, like I said, it hasn't done much, but it's prevented bad stuff from happening. And if the GNU does break up, the ANC cannot run the country alone because they don't have enough votes. They don't have enough, members of parliament to do that without the DA involved. That means they're either going to have to, have a minority government, or partner up with someone like the EFF or the MK, as well as the smaller parties out there. Now, I don't think the EFF and MK are going to be in partnership together. I think it's going to be one or the other. And if either one of them or the other party, you're probably going to have to, like I said, have a couple other guys around just to basically, buff up the numbers. But in terms of the hope for growth rates in South Africa going forward, I would be, quite surprised to see anything above 2% for the next couple of years. Now, moving on to the AI segment. So 2 bits of AI news that we had come out. Firstly, we saw a couple court cases go in favor of AI companies, Anthropic and Meta, which is Facebook, around copyright. Now, one of the things that happened was, or what has happened with regards to the new development of AI technology, is that a question has arisen. What happens to the person whose output content was used to train the AI system? Now, if it was a human person that basically read a book, or read about a couple million books, and was able to draw patterns or ideas from these books and create a new book that was different from the original books he read, that is perfectly fine. That's how people have always done things. You read, plenty of books in your life. You hear stories, you get inspiration from music, etc., etc. You kind of build an internal world that you are then able to produce either music or books or films or whatever it is. You watch a Quentin Tarantino film, there's a lot of like throwbacks to stuff that is done by Italian directors of westerns and so on, the good, the bad, the ugly, that kind of thing. You listen to Celine Dion sing, there's obviously stuff that goes back to Whitney Houston. There's all that kind of inspiration from the past. The question is that, are AI systems allowed to take inspiration? We know they can't copy, but can they take inspiration like humans take inspiration? Can they, be trained on a whole bunch of different stuff and produce something that's different from the stuff that they were trained on, but inspired in some ways, or maybe kind of like an amalgamation of the stuff they were trained on? Is that allowed? And it does seem to be that the courts are ruling that it is allowed. This is a significant, clarification, because it significantly reduces the ability of these AI companies to produce stuff. Now, look, there's certain AI companies out there that are going to, run afoul of this. I mean, Midjourney is one company I think is not going to be able to use this defense. Why? Because it'll produce pretty much exactly what you want. If you ask, for instance, a scene from Avengers or something, it'll produce something that's almost exactly to what the movie has with Thanos, etc. That kind of stuff is going to, infringe on copyright. But if somehow they say make a superhero movie, and they kind of basically looked at everything from Superman back in the 1970s to the Avengers to Spider-Man, etc., and made a movie about a new superhero, even though inspired by Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, whatever it may be, that is as different enough as a human being would have made stuff, I think that will actually fly. I think that will actually be allowed. You can't go out and make Mickey Mouse, blowing up something. But you can get a picture of some cartoon character that kind of draws inspiration from Mickey Mouse and Goofy and whatnot, but not exactly a copy of any of them. That I think is allowed. So that's an important aspect to this. It's going to really improve the ability of these companies to train models. Now, there's still a couple of things to be clarified here. For instance, with Anthropic, one of the things they did was they had a 7 million book collection that they used to train their model. The thing is, they didn't buy those books. They pirated them. They got them from a pirated site. That doesn't fall under fair use, by the way. You can't, pirate stuff. And there is a significant amount that can be, levied against a company that pirates stuff. I think it's something around about $150,000 per, instance of piracy. 7 million books times 150,000. That's a lot more valuable than Anthropic's, the market cap. So that's still to be ironed out. And like I said, Midjourney, etc., probably is not going to be able to fly. But I think, in terms of what instinctively you might, believe to be fair use, I think that is going to be going forward. I think these guys are going to be able to, read the New York Times. They're going to be able to read the Wall Street Journal and draw inferences from what they read. That is probably going to be significantly negative for, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, because there was a view that, the amount of information these companies had could be a source of revenue for them going forward. But if all it was required was basically to pay the amount of money to buy the paper, from the newsstands or whatever, which is going to be $1 or so. If that's all that's required to get access to the information, as long as you don't basically copy it word for word, well, that doesn't really seem to be a business model then, is it? Because you're going to have maybe about 5 or 10 copies sold to Anthropic, XAI, Meta, etc. And those guys are just going to, get all the effort that went into making, that day's New York Times and whatnot, for effectively the price of one newspaper. That's not a model for the New York Times, or that will favor the New York Times going forward. Now, moving on, we had results from Micron. They were a bit better than expected. Now, Micron, for those that don't know, makes what's called high bandwidth memory. High bandwidth memory is important to understand, is because when we first started looking at AI, the big thing everyone was talking about was the chips. The ability of these chips to basically be trained and do a bunch of stuff like that. And memory was kind of like a side effect, or was like a side idea. But over time, it's become clear that you need to remember stuff. You need to actually have a big context. You need to be able to remember a lot of stuff in order to make your AI, as useful as possible. And that's where these high bandwidth memory, companies like SK Hynix and Micron, I think are going to be valuable going forward. Now, there's only a few companies in the world. I think there's about 3 companies in the world. These 2 companies plus Samsung that makes these kind of chips. And it does appear that these kind of chips are at least as important as, for instance, what NVIDIA makes, in terms of the importance of, the ability for it to basically be used to create AIs. You need to have this memory, plus you need to have the NVIDIA kind of chips to basically, create and run afterwards these AI programs. And the fact that we are seeing Micron basically have really, really great results, revenue higher than expected, etc., and give a very rosy forecast of AI demand going forward, does seem to indicate that AI demand seems at least to be quite high. I have talked about it in the past. I did a report recently about AI, showing that the amount of spend on AI is still, despite the fact that they are ramping up revenue faster than any companies in history, remains quite a bit higher. The amount of revenue that they spend, amount of money they spend, is quite a bit higher than the amount of revenue they collect. But I do think that at least for the foreseeable future, the demand for hardware, be it NVIDIA or these memory chips, is going to remain really strong. And that I think is going to be positive for these stocks prices. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to speaking again next week. Cheers.